guys, welcome to Scar Stories. Today is week 2 of my new series, Addicted. Today I interview Registered Dietitian Patrizia Jesue on a not-so-talked-about area of addiction, eating disorders. It's more common than you think, especially in the diet-crazed culture we live in. Is sugar the problem? And how do you get an eating disorder anyway? Are some personalities more predisposed to eating disorders than others? We'll answer all these questions and more. Check this out. Hey everybody, welcome to another episode of Scar Stories. This is week 2 of our topic on addiction. And today we're going to be talking about eating disorders and food and sugar and how that all sort of relates to this issue. I have an amazing guest with us today that we're going to be talking to. Her name is Patrizia Jesue. I hope I got that right. Patrizia Jesue, what a beautiful name. And she is just awesome. We've been talking already today and you are going to really enjoy hearing from her. She's got some great information. I think it's going to really inspire you guys and also just serve as a way to educate us a little bit about this topic. So I know it's one of those things that there's probably a lot more people out there suffering with this and dealing with it than maybe we even know. I think it's one of those things that's maybe a little harder to talk about just because of the day and age we live in. We all want to be fit and take care of ourselves. And this can be a hard thing to maybe address or get help with. So I'm really excited to hear from her. We're going to ask her a few questions today. And thank you for joining us, Patrizia. How are you?
You're welcome. You're welcome. Thank you for having me. I really appreciate the opportunity to talk about something that I'm really passionate about.
Awesome. Well, we are so glad that you can be here. And I know we had some technical problems when we were starting today. So thank you so much for hanging with me to get this right,
Sure.
so we get this interview. So awesome. Well, first of all, tell us a little bit about yourself. And I know that you are a registered dietitian, which is awesome. And tell us a little bit how you got into this.
Sure. Yeah. So I've been a registered dietitian since 1997. I know that dates me a little bit, but I've been doing this for over 20 years and I still love it just as much.
Awesome.
To be honest, I don't really know why I went into dietetics originally. I'm good at science and math, and that's one of the areas of focus for this degree. Sure. So it kind of led me there. But in terms of working with eating disorders specifically, it's really just been a passion of mine. I don't have lived experience with an eating disorder. A lot of my clients will ask me that, and I do not. A lot of people, professionals who go into this field do have lived experience, and that's their way of kind of giving back to this community, which is awesome. For me, it's a little different. I'm Italian. And so I grew up eating food and loving food, and I'm really passionate about food. I love to cook, and it's upsetting and sad to see that some people don't have that, happiness or contentment around food. So really, I was drawn to the field in a way, I think, just to help people feel more comfortable around food and have food freedom and have a more happy relationship with food for themselves. So, yeah.
That's awesome. That's awesome. That's so important too. I mean, it's like a lot of the areas of addiction. I think so much of our attitude plays a part in how we choose these different behaviors or how we maybe fall into these different behaviors. And that can be, we're going to be talking more about that together. So that's awesome. That's awesome. How do eating disorders differ from like other types of addictions like drugs and alcohol, things of that nature?
Yeah, there's definitely some similarities and definitely some differences. We do know that people who struggle with eating disorders are more likely to also have a co-occurring addiction issue like drugs and alcohol. So we definitely see some similar tendencies there. The main way that they differ is that, eating disorders can't really follow that 12-step abstinence model. That's an excellent model. It's very effective for people who are in recovery from drugs and alcohol. And there are actually some 12-step programs in the eating disorder world that some people really believe in and feel good about. And if that's what gives them recovery, great. But the majority of us don't use that model. And the reason is we can't abstain from food. We can't remove it from the equation and live our lives and go day by day saying, okay, I'm not going to use today. I'm not going to use today. We have to find a way to navigate a relationship with food. We can't abstain from it. So that's the big difference with the addiction model.
And that seems like that would be really difficult because it's really easy. I mean, I know how I am even with sweets. I have a hard time sometimes overindulging with sweets. So my whole thing is like, I don't want them in the house. I don't want the snacks in the house because I know, but you can't do that with all food. And if you've got an issue with all food overall, that could be more challenging because obviously you have to eat for nutrition and to sustain life. So that's got to be really tricky. Well, and that kind of leads me to another question for you. Tell us a little bit about how a registered dietitian contributes to that recovery,
Sure. Yeah, definitely. So the dietitian is a recognized important member of the treatment team. We typically treat eating disorders in what's called a 3-prong approach. So we're using the expertise of a medical person, so a physician, primary care doc, somebody who's overseeing the medical component. And then there's the psychologist who's helping with the emotion regulation. And then there's me, the dietitian, who's really a critical part of the process. And my role is really twofold. The first is helping people establish some sort of meal plan, and that's unique to them. So there isn't like one set plan that I use for everybody. It's really tailored to the individual, and it's really tailored to help them with whatever their symptoms are, whether it's binging, purging, restricting. So I'm creating a meal plan that really supports their recovery and their remission from those behaviors. But then the other part of what I do is helping people challenge their distorted beliefs around food. There's a lot of misinformation out there about nutrition and a lot of food fears, I call them. And so my job is to really help people look at those food fears, identify, are they really credible? Is this really something that we should be following? Is this servicing you in any good way? So really helping them challenge those distortions around food.
Right. Now, and that brings up a really good point because I think, the internet can be this great tool, but then on the other hand, there is so much information that sometimes it gets very confusing. I know just even for me, like you hear about different diets or you don't eat this and don't eat that. And I think especially as a woman, I feel like there's so much pressure sometimes. I mean, which is, I know a question that, I'm going to ask at some point is, do you feel like social media really contributes to this problem in our world? Like you see it making it worse, better? What are your thoughts on that?
Definitely. I mean, it's pervasive and, we live in diet culture. We're swimming in it, and there's just so much information out there, and social media certainly doesn't help because now we get to watch everybody on their diet and see their success and their bodies transform. And so I think there's a tremendous amount of pressure, especially for young people today, to look a certain way and to present themselves a certain way on that social media platform. And I'm not saying that it's causing the eating disorder. I think that's multifactorial, but it's absolutely contributing to the challenge and recovery from an eating disorder. And it's creating a lot of stress for people, for sure.
Sure. No, I can totally see that because I know just being in my line of work as an artist, there's a fair amount of pressure to look your best and to be fit and things like that. And I really do love working out and taking care of myself just because it's such a stress reliever for me, but I also love food. So I can really see how I haven't struggled with this myself, thank goodness. But I mean, I am very compassionate to people that really, it goes too far. And it's like, which is, I think another question I would have for you. And that is like, how do you know if you have gone too far? Like, is this a gradual disorder? Is it something that sort of creeps up on us? Or is it something that like, it just one day you just start really getting overboard in how you're looking at food and you know what I mean? Like,
yeah, I think it can present differently from person to person, but generally, someone doesn't just wake up one day with an eating disorder. It is a gradual process. It might start with just increased focus on body size. Maybe it's a comment that somebody made like, oh, you've gained weight or, to lose weight, and it can kind of start there. And then it really does start to snowball. It's kind of like a diet gone wrong or, dieting at its extreme. There's lots of people out there who diet that don't develop an eating disorder.
Right.
But every person who has an eating disorder, it started with a diet for them.
Really interesting. That's really interesting. Well, and tell us too, just to educate our listeners too, and even me, what are the different types of eating disorders? I mean, I know we've heard of anorexia and bulimia. Are those really the only two? Do you kind of fall into one of those categories, or?
Actually several. I mean, the most common would be what we know, anorexia, which is extreme restriction of food and an intense fear of gaining weight or being fat. There's also a body dysmorphia component to that, where somebody sees themselves as much larger than they really appear.
Wow.
Bulimia nervosa is somebody who is binging and purging. So they're taking in large amounts of food and then getting rid of it. That could be through vomiting or compulsive exercise. So there's lots of different ways that people try to get rid of the food. But then we also know that binge eating disorder exists. And that is something that's been around for decades, but it has just now been recognized as an eating disorder of its own. And these are folks who really struggle. It's kind of like compulsive overeating is what it's been termed in the past. And believe it or not, binge eating disorder comprises more people than anorexia and bulimia combined. So It is most common eating disorder, but because there's so much shame and guilt associated with binge eating, it's really not talked about, and it's severely underreported.
Right. Wow. Mm-hmm. I know. I think that's what makes this whole issue hard. And that's why I wanted to cover it on, series, because I wanted to, I think it's always great to expose things that we know we're all aware of it, but we don't talk about it, and it just kind of gives us a platform. So thanks for explaining that. That's really interesting. Is there, you kind of already answered this, but is there a difference between having a long-term eating disorder versus like a one-time event? Like if I overeat one time, that doesn't necessarily mean I have an eating disorder. Well, you know what I mean? Like, and how do you know that? And that kind of leads to this question too. If maybe I'm someone maybe I do it a little more often than I used to, because maybe I'm at home because of Corona and I'm out of work, and which I know we all get. I mean, stress eating is something I've totally done. Like just you're frustrated. Mm-hmm. I'm going to eat some chips. I'll feel better, which is totally like a wrong attitude. But how do you know when you've crossed that line? Are there any? You know what I mean? Do you have advice for us there?
I mean, I think we've all done things that are not in line with, listening to our bodies, eating when we're hungry and stopping when we're full. So we've all overeaten. We've all maybe skipped something because we're busy and we didn't have food or whatever. So I think, a one-time episode or things like that is definitely not diagnostic of an eating disorder. However, it's when it's a recurring issue. So it's happening frequently. And then it's also contributing to our mental and physical health, so if we start to lose weight or, our physical health is suffering because of this way that we're eating. And so if it starts to impair our ability to function, when it's really taking its toll on our mental ability, that's kind of when we know that it's starting to take the wrong turn.
Sure. Or maybe what if we're maybe avoiding certain things? Is that a sign? Like, let's say we're avoiding going to a party because we're afraid of eating too much, or you know what I mean? Or people like.
Yep. When it's impairing our social well-being, I've had clients that don't go out on dates because that's kind of what you do on a first date is get food of some sort, or the movie theater or a full-on lunch or dinner, excuse me. So a lot of my clients, that's a very telltale sign when we're avoiding food in those social settings, or we're not going to the social gatherings strictly because we're uncomfortable with what the food is going to be.
Right. Wow. That's really interesting. Are there, do you find that there's certain personalities that are more prone to eating disorder, or like, can you talk a little bit more about that? Like,
Yeah. Like I was saying earlier, like eating disorders are multifactorial. They're not caused by one single thing, but there's definitely temperaments that are common in the eating disorder world. So the person who is most likely to develop anorexia is someone who's going to be more of a type A temperament, perfectionistic, kind of rigid thinker, someone who has maybe more OCD type features, very driven, kind of goal-oriented individual.
Wow.
And
it sounds like me. Maybe I'm in.
Right.
like, I mean, I'm like a type A artist, which is kind of weird, but I'm heavy, like I'm so disciplined and and I love structure. Like I love to have structure, even though I like to be creative. I like to break the structure, but that's
totally. And those are great qualities. They get us in life and they help us. But when we apply them to food and eating, it's a train wreck.
Sure.
And same thing with, bulimia nervosa, we see kind of the opposite spectrum. So these are the extroverts. These are kind of the novelty seeking, impulsive people, people who are unstructured. They detest structure. Those temperaments tend to be the people that go on to develop more of a bulimia presentation.
I see. That's awesome.
And binge eating disorder is kind of a mixed bag of any of those. And just to be clear, I'm not saying that everybody who's perfectionistic or type A temperament is going to go on to develop an eating disorder. That's not what I'm saying.
Oh, no, I
know. We see that those are the common kinds of personality traits in each of those eating disorders.
Right. Mm-hmm. That's really interesting though. Because it has to, you just think about like what, how does it play into that, because I mean, and we kind of touched on this a little bit also, but I want to hear more about this. As you are working with them, and I know you're just working as the dietitian piece, and you're not necessarily working on you actually are essentially working on the psychology piece a little too, though, because you were talking about their attitudes about food. I mean, what are the things that, in your opinion, really drive people to struggle with an eating disorder? Are there some similar like life events or similar pains or similar difficulties that some of these people share?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, we see, unfortunately, trauma histories are common in this population. Again, maybe some comorbid issues of depression, anxiety, other mental health issues. So we're going to see that as well. But the general theme here is that, people don't choose to have an eating disorder. They don't wake up one day and say, gee, that sounds like a really good idea. It becomes a maladaptive coping mechanism. So there's some sort of pain or sadness, and it doesn't have to be like this major, event or traumatic situation, but there's definitely pain or emotion dysregulation that the person is feeling. Maybe it's an inability to self-soothe when they're feeling anxious or stressed. And so they really turn to the eating disorder because it does serve a purpose. It helps them feel better, whether that feel better is it takes their mind off the real issue or it numbs them out. That can vary from person to person, but the common link there is that they're using the eating disorder to cope with some sort of distress that they're experiencing.
Right. Well, which also, makes me think too, that it's so important that we're compassionate with people that struggle with that thing. Because it does seem like it's a thing where, we can get so judgy with each other of like, well, this person is heavy or fat or skinny or like, you know what I mean? Like it seems to be such a open arena of opinion, especially on social media, which it seems like could really exacerbate someone who's really having a real struggle with. Yeah,
I'm so glad you're saying that. I really applaud your ability to recognize that there's such a stigma around eating disorders. And I will say it again, people don't choose to have them. They're a living nightmare, for the people that the person that's going through it. And so, we tend to say things like, what's wrong with you? Just eat, that's gross. I can't believe you throw up your food. That's disgusting. Or don't you know that that's bad for you? It's like kinds of comments are so harmful to these individuals, and it's so shaming to them. And, additionally, where in society we have somehow found it okay to comment about somebody else's appearance and weight and shape is beyond me. I don't know where that comes from or why we feel at liberty to comment on somebody's physical appearance, whether it's, hair color or height, or worse, and most common, weight, shape, and appearance. It's really unfortunate, because it creates a lot of, again, shame for these individuals. But it also ignores the fact that I am more than what I look like. There's someone inside of me.
Sister, I agree with you wholeheartedly.
Yeah, there's someone inside of that is, something to be looked at, not just my appearance.
Right. And I'm so glad you're saying that, because that's such a big part of me as an artist, and my message with my fans is that it is so important, the type of people we are, and our integrity and our character should be the thing that we work on the most. And we, as a society, we've gotten so caught up in how everything looks that we've got a lot of plastic, perfect looking people with no soul, and it's like, that is a huge problem, because, we're all going to get older, and God made us all different. We're all different shapes and sizes. And I mean, it's great to take care of yourself and to be the best you. I think that's great, because you want to be healthy, obviously.
Sure.
You know that if you are like super overweight, it's not good for your heart and things like that. But I mean, yeah, I agree with you. We've gotten so judgy, and we create value completely on how something looks. And if anything we've learned is looks lie. I mean, it doesn't always tell you the whole story of everything in life. That's true. And
exactly. And we don't want to assume that a larger bodied person is an unhealthy person. That's absolutely, like you said, maybe that's how God made them. That's their body design. That's the blueprint of their body. And so, we don't want to make these assumptions that someone who's larger bodied is just sitting around eating, ice cream all day long.
Right.
Want to kind of debunk that.
Right.
One of the things that I remind my clients of all the time is that you are an instrument, not an ornament.
Right. Very good.
My clients, because there's that ornamental side of us. We brush our hair, we put makeup on, we put on an outfit, so we're not going to completely ignore that piece, but who I am is really the instrumental part of me, not the ornamental part of me.
Right. That's beautiful. I love that. That's a tweetable comment, you guys.
Yeah.
Yeah, right now. That's awesome. That's really great. No, I'm glad that you said that, because I've got to believe too, I'm sure you come to care about a lot of your patients too. And I'm sure it breaks your heart to hear what some of them maybe have had to struggle through, and the fact that they have this issue. And I think that's one of the reasons I'm so happy to do this show today, to really just increase our awareness and just to increase our compassion, because there are people around us sometimes, you guys, that are struggling that we don't even know they're struggling. We don't even know what they've been through and what their story is. And that's kind of one of the purposes of this show, is to sort of create a platform where we can share our scar stories, so to speak, and know that there's a place where you are celebrated and loved. And that sometimes even in sharing our stories, we can experience that healing that we need so that we can be healthy in all these areas. So that's awesome. That's awesome. Now, another question I have for you, in the spirit of what you're saying there, as we understand these different areas and how people are struggling, how are eating disorders treated exactly? What is the lowdown?
There's different levels of treatment. Unfortunately, in some severe cases, the treatment is really a hospitalization or a residential stay at a facility that is specialized in treating eating disorders. And we're looking at a long-term situation, 30 days, 90 days. Obviously, I'm an outpatient provider, so I'm treating people who can still live in everyday life, go to work, go to school, maybe even play a sport, but are working on their recovery from an eating disorder. So the treatment in my setting looks like, probably weekly sessions with a therapist, every other week appointments with a physician to make sure labs and heart rate and all the medical parameters are in line. Okay. And then with the dietitian once a week as well to work on the meal plan and food issues. So that's typically, how we treat them. But again, there's levels. So there's different ways of treating it, different levels of care.
Sure. And do you find as you're treating someone with this, do you find that as their friends and family sort of realize the seriousness of what's happening, do you find that most families and friends will begin maybe supporting even if they don't understand, or do you have to sometimes counsel them also? Maybe more stubborn and seeing like the reality of what's happening?
Definitely. We like to bring families into the picture because this requires a lot of support, so sure. It's not common for me to work with a spouse or children of my patient or, my client's better half or siblings or parents, really just educating them on the language to use, how to support them, how to help them. Unfortunately, a lot of times family members police their their person who's struggling with an eating disorder. And it comes from a place of care and concern. They're worried, but it comes across in not the most supportive of ways. So we really help families, be there, be available, but don't do it in this like stringent kind of authoritative policing way.
Right.
Like you eat this or you can't do that, so we try to make it more of a family approach for sure.
That's great. Now, let's say I had a friend that was struggling with something like this. Is there any advice that you would give maybe with some of our listeners out there? Maybe they have someone in their family, or maybe it's a really good friend of theirs and they've noticed some things and they're worried. Like, what's the best way to help?
It's hard because, eating disorders are disorders of denial. So chances are, if you approach the person that you're concerned about, they're going to deny it. But I always encourage people to do that, approach them in a gentle way. There's no need to accuse them, but just make statements like, I'm noticing blank. I'm noticing that you're not eating lunch anymore with me. I'm noticing that you seem preoccupied around food. I'm noticing, whatever it is that you're noticing. I think it's important to approach that person in a very compassionate and caring way and just say that you're noticing this and that you have concerns. And maybe it would be a good idea to talk to somebody about that. Chances are the person is going to deny it. And so what I would then recommend is to be persistent, to let it be, but maybe go back a week later or 2 weeks later. Hey, I'm still noticing such and such, and I'm still very concerned. Are you sure there isn't anything that I can do to help? Maybe can I give you some resources? So I think it's gentle persistence is kind of the key when you notice somebody has an issue or worry somebody has an issue, but don't know how to quite approach them.
Sure. And that's such a delicate line to walk, because I know so many times, like, we can see our friends hurting, because you hear this even about like abuse and things like that are going on. It's like, it's such a hard thing because people do feel a lot of shame, but at the same time you're concerned and you don't want to just not say anything because you care about this person. And it becomes, it's hard. It's hard to like know what to say and what to not say, but that's great advice. That's a great reminder on how to approach that, and I also want to make sure, I know we're reaching the end of our time together, but I want to, we didn't talk about sugar, and I want to, because it's such an important issue.
Yeah.
As we've talked about some of this, where do you see sugar playing a role in addiction? And how do you see that relationship with sugar kind of play a part in all of this?
Yeah. I'm probably going to say something that's going to be controversial here, but I don't see sugar playing a role in addiction. No. I don't believe that sugar is addictive. I don't think that there's a chemical dependency. There's definitely not a physiological dependency issue and addiction to sugar. Although many people say I have a sugar addiction, and there's books about it. And
we hear about it. That's why I wanted to ask you what you thought about it, because it's kind of confusing. You're like, well, wait, am I addicted to sugar? Does that mean I have sugar? So it's very
addict, like somebody who's addicted to drugs or alcohol, and you give them their drug or alcohol of choice, let's say a bottle of vodka or cocaine, and you put it right in front of them, they would use it. If you take somebody who says they're a sugar addict and you give them a bowl of sugar with a spoon, they wouldn't touch it. So really aren't addicted to sugar, despite all that language. I think what people and again, I'm using the word addiction loosely, is what people are addicted, or maybe we'll say attracted to, is the comfortable feeling that food can give us. When we eat certain foods that feel good in our mouth, that taste good, it lights up pleasure centers in our brain. And so it feels, are we addicted to that food? No. But we like that feeling that food gives us. And so therein lies kind of the foggy gray area for people that were addicted to food.
Right.
But when we believe that sugar is an addiction, then we start to think about abstaining from it, which is not the ideal.
Right.
What we know with people who struggle with overeating, binge eating, is the more we take that food away from them, the more preoccupied with that food they become, and the more likely they are. So it's actually not preferred to remove their environment or remove the sugar from their environment. It's actually more of the recommendation to teach them how to regulate themselves around that food.
Right. I see what you're saying. Yeah. And that can almost become an easy cop out, maybe, when we just kind of say, well, I'm just addicted to sugar, or I'm just like, it's almost like it's an excuse to have no control over a certain thing, versus like, no, you can, we can choose, what we're eating. We might like a certain thing. You know what I'm saying? Like, I mean, versus like, obviously someone who has an eating disorder, it's a little different level of, emotional involvement. Right. But you know what I'm saying, though? I mean, I think that we've heard that a lot, like in the media, of just sugar addiction thing. So it's kind of, thanks for casting some light on that for us, because that is something I've even been confused about, because I've heard that. I'm like, maybe I'm addicted to sugar too. Because I know sometimes if it isn't, like I will crave things that are sweet, but it's probably because, like you're saying, it lights up that pleasure center of your brain and makes you sort of like, you enjoy that moment with, a dessert or something,
Yeah. Yeah. And with food cravings, again, what we notice is that when we just let ourselves eat the food that we're craving, but we do it in a mindful way where we're present and not just like eating it without, paying attention, it actually takes the craving, makes it go away, like not eating the food that we're craving intensifies the craving. It makes that thought go up and our preoccupation is increased. But then other times people say, oh, forget it, I'll just eat it. And then they eat a bunch of it and they're totally not doing it the whole way. Right. So really what we recommend is if you're noticing that you're having a craving, give yourself some space to eat that food. Maybe do it in a safe way around, people, like go get an ice cream versus buying a tub of ice cream and bringing it home. Right. Give yourself permission to eat the food that you're craving. Don't fight that.
Sure. No, that's such great advice. And I think that really plays into your whole philosophy of just developing a healthy attitude with food. And that is really developing an unhealthy attitude usually comes from some other pain that's in us too. And it's an opportunity, maybe if we are having a problem, to really dig deeper and say, all right, what's really going on in my heart? What's the real issue? And that's so wonderful that you are doing this work. I want to applaud you for what you do. I imagine it's very rewarding. I bet it's frustrating at moments too, but I'm sure you have some success stories and things like that. I mean, do you see, I know as difficult as it is to confront this kind of disorder, do you have is there a statistic that you could give us? Like, can they overcome this? Is this something that's hopeless? Yeah.
No, it's not hopeless at all. I always have hope. I've seen some very dark situations in the 20 years that I've done this work, and I've seen people come out of those. So I always have hope. And this is definitely something that people can recover from. It's hard work. It doesn't just, happen easily or effortlessly. It's a lot of work. It's quite possibly some of the hardest things my clients will ever have to do in their lives. But it's possible. And I see it often in my years of work. So that's the most rewarding piece of this, is really seeing people come out of those dark places and live a life free from their eating disorder.
Right. That's awesome. Well, thank you so much for doing this with us today. This has been so informative for me too. And I appreciate everything you shared. And I think you're going to be a real inspiration to everybody, I'm sure, that's hearing right now. So thank you so much, Patrizia.
You're so welcome.
Yeah. And hopefully we'll have you on again sometime. So it'd be great to do it. So thank you so much for being a part of it, and have a wonderful rest of your day. And thank you so much. Thanks for listening, you guys. Awesome. Thank you. You're my favorite sky. Thanks for joining me for another episode of Scar Stories. If you like what you hear, please hit the subscribe button. Help us spread the love. To make a one-time donation to Scar Stories, click on the donation link in the episode notes below. Or, for just a few dollars a month, you can join the Scar Stories community on Patreon. Your membership includes private Q&As with one of my awesome guests, plus a free digital soul guide inspired by our monthly series. Members also get the chance to share their Scar Stories live, on the air, during the final week of each series. Life can hit you hard, and it's easy to quit. Whatever your Scar Story, it matters. You got this.